Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Parallel Mic podcast. We are joined once again by returning guest Ryder Lee. Ryder, we're here to discuss the second film that you've produced with Jay Widener. This one's called The Clockwork Shining. We did cover before your past film, which was JFKX, and you was also on talking about ufology on the previous episode. So you're one of my I think you might be one of the most returning guests. I'm not sure quite how to phrase that, but you've been on the show three times. So really nice to see you again, Ryder. Just a quick update, how are things going in general before we get stuck into talking about this film?
Thanks for having me on, Mike. Really appreciate it. You've kind of been with me for a minute, and it's an honor and a privilege to be back on your show. And how this movie started, this was the movie that we wanted to originally do first before JFKX, but me and Jay Widener ended up doing JFKX first, and then we did this movie. And this movie's really been a passion project for me. It took me, I've been working on it for over 6 months, and it's up on Amazon Prime now. You can buy it or rent it. I'm pretty sure you can get it in the UK and in the United States. And if you're in another country, it might not be available on Amazon Prime other than in the UK and in the United States. But if your country gives you the ability to get Apple TV, you can also watch it on Apple TV. So I'm not for sure where in what other countries Apple TV is available, but hopefully we can get a link in the description so people can easily find it and click on it. But if it's not available in your country, try Apple TV, and then if you can't get Apple TV in your country, we'll soon be able to release it to people everywhere worldwide. But right now, Amazon is only letting people in the UK that have Amazon Prime Video subscription to be able to purchase it, and people within the United States. So it was a really big project for me. There's a lot of people that was involved in this. We have Mark Devlin in the documentary. We have Kathy O'Brien. We have Joe Atwell. We have former AFOSI Air Force Special Agent Walter Bosley in it, and myself and Jay Widener. So it was a really big project, and I'm super happy with it. And you actually got to see it. What did you think of it?
Yeah, so I found it extremely provocative, actually. It was a really interesting documentary to begin with because The Shining is one of those films that everyone has seen pretty much, and it's etched into our consciousness. I think for people our age, we're kind of a similar age, I'm guessing, Ryder. We saw it when we was pretty young, and a lot of the themes in that went over our head. And now watching it back as an adult with this new layer added to it, it blew me away, and it linked up to all kinds of places. Like I would never have guessed that you was going to start to talk about the Nazi experiments and MK Ultra and Project Monarch and all of that stuff that you brought into it. That just blew me away, and I've been thinking about it ever since. In fact, I was in the sauna just about 2 hours ago, and I was still thinking about it. So I'm hoping to draw as much of that out as we can. But maybe we can begin by you just telling us your story with The Shining in general before you actually got to making the documentary, Ryder. Why The Shining? Was it something you was a fan of already? Did you have suspicions about it long ago, or was this something that came up recently?
Well, what had happened was is I was going to bring Jay Widener on my show around 2 years ago now. It's been about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years, and he had already previously been on the show, but I wanted to talk to him about his previous movies because he's one of the first people to look at The Shining as Stanley Kubrick's confession for faking the moon landings. That was his hypothesis and his theory on his two previous films that he made about Stanley Kubrick. So I watched those movies in order to prepare to interview him so I can ask him questions, in-depth questions that other people might not have asked him before. And then I started watching The Shining, and I'm like, I'd seen The Shining before, and I didn't really like it. I didn't understand what everyone was raving about with the movie. I thought that it was kind of bland, and because nothing really happens within The Shining, like it's subliminal, as we discuss in our documentary. It's a subliminal movie. It's not really a horror movie. I feel like if it was released today, it would not be classified as a horror movie. It would be a psychological thriller, is what it would be under. So I'm watching it, and I watched it several times, and I'm like, I don't really understand what's going on here. Like, some of this stuff doesn't make any sense. There's so many continuity errors in this movie then I'm thinking, well, Stanley Kubrick is like he's a perfectionist. He's a master filmmaker. He puts everything together exactly the way he wants it, and it doesn't make any sense why there's so many continuity errors in this movie. It probably has the most continuity errors out of any movie that's ever been made. There's several of them. The that we show in the movie, the sticker disappearing on Danny's door, the chair disappearing behind Jack, the carpet changing when Danny stands up in the hallway before he goes into room 237. Light switches disappear. There's a light switch or plug in outside of Ullman's office when Jack first walks in, and then later on when he goes in to destroy the radio to prevent Danny and Wendy from leaving the hotel, it's gone. And then there's a light switch underneath by the storage room where they're getting the tour of the hotel. Wendy and Danny's getting the tour of the hotel, and Halloran says this is the storage room, which it's interesting because we show in our movie that it doesn't sound like he says storage room. It sounds like he says story room, which that's something we can get into later on. I just wanted to bring it up really quickly. But there's a light switch that's beside the door whenever Wendy and Danny are getting a tour by Halloran and he's showing him the storage room. There's a light switch there, but then later on, whenever Wendy is taking Jack into the storage room, it's gone. So there's so many of these types of continuity errors, along with one that's not actually in the movie that I didn't remember until after the movie had already been done and written, which is in the first establishing shot of the Overlook Hotel. There's no maze in the background. We don't have a maze back there, which that those external shots were filmed at, some of them were filmed at Timberline Lodge in Oregon, and the rest of it was filmed on a set in England. But that's a continuity error. Like you don't, the first establishing shot doesn't have the maze in the background, but then later on the maze is there. So there's so many of these little details that are missing and that are screwed up. And we also talk about within the movie how Kubrick is basically rewriting the entire movie as the movie is being made, which no director would ever do that. That's like that would be a disaster almost. You know, no one in their right mind would be writing the movie as you're making the movie, especially someone that has such prowess as Stanley Kubrick. So what I have kind of put together, it's not really explicitly stated in the movie because we like to leave some things open to interpretation within our movie, just like Stanley Kubrick leaves things open to interpretation in all of his films. That it seems like that these continuity errors are placed there on purpose to give the viewer a sense of subliminally questioning their reality as they're watching somebody within the movie also start to question their reality and go into delusions as Jack seems to spiral down this this rabbit hole of hallucinations and delusions and paranoia. It seems like that is what Kubrick is also trying to do on the audience. So it's not only an experiment within the film, and also it's also an experiment on the actors within the film as he's writing the movie as it's being shot. I mean, this you know pissed off Jack Nicholson so bad, and we show clips of it in our movie that he just stopped reading the script. He was like, I'm not going to read it anymore, like, because I'm just going to do the ones that Stanley Kubrick types up every day because it's constantly changing. There's no reason for me to memorize all these lines whenever they're going to change tomorrow. So that's where we kind of go with it. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a strange film, and I guess, yeah, what you were saying there is that all of these different continuity errors, it's not errors because he has messed something up. He's actually trying to create some schism in your mind so that even if you don't consciously recognize it, you're going to subliminally recognize it. Your subliminal mind might pick up that something's not right here, and it leads you to that tense feeling. And I think that's probably what I remember most from The Shining when I was younger was just feeling extremely tense and not knowing why because nothing's happening. It's not like The Exorcist, for example, where you've got something kind of gruesome happening constantly, or it's not like a modern day horror film, which is like a shock fest. It's meant to make you jump. In The Shining, none of that's happening, and for like you said, for a long time, nothing happens. And yet, I would say 99% of that film just makes me feel uneasy. I don't know if you got that when you first watched it, Ryder, or if it was more of a boredom type feeling.
Yeah, it's a really uneasy type of feeling that you get. And I think some of that comes not only from the imagery, but also from the soundtrack of the movie. The soundtrack has really got that creepy, eerie type of feeling. And some things that some people have reported whenever they first watched our documentary was that they would have these really strange and weird dreams, like slash nightmares. Jay Widener showed this to uh, some of his friends and some of his colleagues in a private screening, and they all apparently had really strange dreams afterwards. And I didn't have, which I've watched the movie more than probably anyone is ever going to watch it because I made it. But I had a similar thing happen with watching The Shining. And it was, when I watched it really late at night and I would have like really screwed up dreams. So I stopped watching it late as I'm going to sleep because we know that that type of programming can get into your subconscious and then manifest in your dream state and in your astral state. So I just stopped watching it at night because I didn't want to have to deal with those really strange and weird dreams. But it is something that's being reported, but it doesn't have anything to do with our movie. We didn't put any weird subliminal things in there. There's no ELF tones. There's no music to make you feel a certain way. It's just it's all done with regular organic music and sound effects. So if you do experience something strange after you watch it, then it has to do with The Shining because there's a lot of clips from The Shining that we put inside of our movie.
Okay, do you want me to tell you the extremely visceral and strange dream I had the night I watched it? Because it happened to
Oh,
me.
you had one too? Oh
Oh yeah.
man, you're the second person that I've had done a show with that said this. Yes, tell me. I want to know.
Yeah, so the night I watched it was 2 nights ago, and that evening I had a dream that I was on a plane that was crashing, and then it spiraled into a dream where I was on multiple plane crashes. Now I hate flying, so it's kind of like a nightmare for me, anyways, to be on a plane. I've been on a plane many times because I met a wife who lived in a different country, so I had to, but really can't stand it. But it was very strange. I've never had dreams like this where I genuinely felt I was inside this thing and it was crashing and I knew it was crashing and it was just that helplessness feeling like there's nothing I can do about this. And I think I went through about 7 or 8 plane crashes that night in these separate kind of dreams, and each one was from a slightly different perspective. I was in like a different seat, or one time I was outside watching it crash, the other time I was inside. So yeah, it was just really bizarre, and I woke up and was like, wow, that was quite a night.
Well, you didn't know anything about that. You didn't know that the people have reported the having weird dreams after watching this
Nope.
movie at all. That was
No,
not
I
something that we
totally.
talked about before this show or nothing. That's wild. That's wild.
Yeah.
Well, you're actually the third person because Ryan Gable had the same thing happen to him after I sent him a screener of the movie. Another person that I was just on the other day is named Tim. He had a strange dream after he watched the movie. And now you're the third person so far that has a show that I've sent the screener of the movie to that's had these strange dreams.
So that's really strange. Yeah, that's absolutely bizarre. And yeah, I'll have to go away and think about that one because I never expected you to mention it. So that is weird.
Wild.
You know, it was even weirder the day after I listened to my friend's show, Monica Perez. And in that show, she actually played a cockpit transcript of do you remember when that plane went down and it landed on the Hudson River?
Vaguely. I
Yeah, it was a
vaguely
plane.
remember.
It had a double bird strike and both engines were down and it couldn't make it back to the airport, so they literally landed it on the Hudson River. It was called the Miracle on the Hudson because normally if a plane lands on water, it cartwheels and everyone dies. But they landed this perfect, picture perfect landing on this river, and everyone got out safely. But I never knew she was going to play that. So I had this weird dream, and then I was driving in the car, and then her show's not about anything to do with aviation, but for whatever reason, she stuck that on her show, and I was like, God, this is a really strange day after that night. And then now I'm listening to this cockpit recording. So,
Yeah.
anyways, okay, so let's go back to the film. So nothing really paranormal is happening in this film. So, like you said, it's not exactly a horror film per se, and yet there are these strange interactions that Jack is having. And I just want to kind of let the cat out of the bag for listeners that what you're suggesting in the film and what we're going to talk about is that in this film, Kubrick is telling us something about, let's say, intelligence services and something that they're doing in the background. So, shall we start talking about that now, Ryder, or do you want to kind of build up to it? I'll hand it over to you. You can take us where you want.
Yeah, there's several things that I've seen as I was repeatedly watching this movie, which is another really strange aspect of this because I really didn't think that I was going to find anything new, things that people really hadn't seen before, because the movie has been picked apart by a lot of different people. There's hundreds of theories of people what they think that The Shining is really about, and I think that our theory makes the most sense. It really ties everything up, and once you see it, you're not going to be able to unsee it. You're not going to be able to see The Shining in the same way that you've seen it before. And as I'm watching it, I'm seeing things that really bring this whole thing to make it make sense. And one of those was a handprint on a lady's dress. Whenever Jack is in the gold room, the second time he's in the gold room, and he drinks the alcohol given to him by Lloyd, which is another thing that we bring up within the movie that the CIA has been known for doing. There's an entire Netflix documentary about it, about Frank Olson and how Sidney Gottlieb, which was the head of the CIA MK Ultra programs, spiked his alcoholic drink, and later Frank Olson jumped out of the window of a really big hotel and died. There's been several instances of that where people have kind of gone insane and died in strange ways or died under some suspicious circumstances or off themselves. And so that was the case with a lot of the army personnel in some of the very first MK Ultra experiments. They were kind of taken to this military research center, and they weren't really told what they were going to be experimented on. They were just like, "Hey, inhale this substance," and it was like a large dose of LSD, which it was even stronger than LSD. It was a drug called BZ. It's like 100 times more potent and 100 times more powerful than LSD, and they would make these army personnel go out of their mind for long periods of time, like into a paranoid schizophrenic type state for multiple days. And several of those people ended up offing themselves uh, after those experiments were done. And a lot of them still haven't really recovered, because it's one thing taking a hallucinogenic drug and you know that you're taking a hallucinogenic drug, because you can expect to feel some kind of change, some kind of headspace change, some sort of outward appearance change in your vision. Your body's going to feel loose, and things are going to be different because you're expecting it to be different. But unknowingly getting dosed with some form of hallucinogenic drug is a different story. That's going to do something completely different. And if you're not prepared for it, you can easily go into some kind of psychotic, psychosis, delusional state. And that's kind of like what we see that's happening with Jack within the movie is he gets the alcoholic drink from Lloyd. Wendy comes into the gold room, and Wendy is like, Danny was attacked by a lady upstairs in one of the empty bedrooms. And then Jack goes up to room 237, opens the door. That's when he encounters the very attractive woman, which turns into an elderly lady. But when you walk into room 237, it's unlike anything that else that we've seen exteriorly in The Shining. The carpet is very vivid. The carpet pops is purple and green. The couch is, it's very psychedelic type of scene. And later on, after Jack leaves room 237, he goes back up to his room with Wendy, comes in the door, and Wendy asked him, did you see anything? Did you find anything? And he says, no, I didn't see one goddamn thing. I didn't see anything. So we kind of theorize that it's a possibility that Lloyd isn't a ghost. None of the people within The Shining are ghosts. They are actors playing a role within The Shining as an experiment to see if they can get Jack to kill his family. And it's kind of like a LARP. Have you seen the movie Shutter Island with Leonardo DiCaprio?
I have, yeah, I've seen it.
It's almost identical to that, right? Like how in Shutter Island, it's this police detective that's going to solve this murder at this insane asylum on this island. Then, spoiler alert for Shutter Island. At the end of the movie, it turns out that all these people are just they're actors. They're doing this live action role play for Leonardo DiCaprio's character, and he's actually an inmate on the island. He's an inmate of the insane asylum. And that's sort of what's going on within The Shining. None of these people are ghosts. They're actors, they're LARPers, they're there to run this experiment to see if they can get Jack to commit heinous crimes. I mean, oh, back to the handprint thing. So when Jack, the second time Jack is in the gold room, he stands up, and before he bumps into Grady and Grady spills the alcoholic drink on Jack, there's a lady that walks right behind Jack and Grady, and she's actually the one that bumps into Grady to get him to trip to spill the alcohol on Jack. And she has this handprint on her ass. Now, people have argued with that and said that it's not really a handprint, it's put into the dress, which, regardless whether it's a part of the dress or not, it's still in the form of a handprint, which it has four fingers, which is really interesting because that's what a lot of people say that are, demonic entities have, or for like four fingers. So regardless if it's an actual someone put their handprint on her ass, or if it's made into the dress to look like a handprint, it's still there, and no one has ever seen it until I pointed it out. And then another one is also in the gold room when Ullman is giving them a tour of the hotel. There's a swastika in the background of the gold room that's kind of faded into the wall that no one has ever seen before. And I seen it for the first time. And the way that I seen that is I got to see The Shining on the big screen. They were doing a replay of The Shining in the town that I lived in a year ago for Halloween. So I got to go see it on the big screen, and that's how I saw the swastika in the background of the gold room. And no one has ever seen that before. I'm the first person to ever see that, just like I was the first person to see the handprint on the lady's ass as well. So there are things that people can still find within The Shining, just like I didn't think that I was going to find anything new, but then I found two things that no one has ever seen before or ever commented on before.
Oh, that's crazy. I never realized you was the first person to find that handprint because, yeah, I saw it in the film, but I assumed that you would have found that from somebody else's analysis. So that's crazy that after all these years, people are still finding new stuff. Now, the swastika one I found really interesting because when we start to talk about MK Ultra and the Monarch experiments, and then we look at Operation Paperclip, which is where all the Nazis came across, and a lot of them were doing experiments, and we know that Mengele was really interested in doing experiments on twins. It's really well documented that he would purposely seek out twins to do experiments. Now, we don't know exactly what all of those experiments was, but I would imagine there was lots of experiments to do with telekinesis and mind control. And even today, I don't know. I actually was in a relationship with a twin for a long time, and that whole psychic connection between twins is totally like true. They used to buy each other the same birthday card or the same Christmas card nearly every single year. It was like a running joke. Out of the tens of thousands of cards, they would pick the same card for each other. So I've seen that myself. And when you pointed out the swastika in the gold room, and I thought, well, the twins in this, and then there's the experiments that Mengele did, and now you're telling me about MK Ultra, and it all started to kind of fit together a bit. Is that what it was like for you?
That was what it was like, and we decided not to go the route with the twins, just for the simple fact that they may not actually be twins. Because in the beginning of the movie, when Allman's talking to Jack, which is another really interesting part of this entire movie, because it's really the only Stanley Kubrick movie that gives away the entire plot in the first 10 minutes of the movie between Allman and Jack. Like, Allman tells Jack everything that's basically going to happen to him for the rest of the movie, but it's not directly said. He just says, um, Jack, this isn't a physically demanding job. This is more of a psychological job because of the extreme isolation and the cabin fever that some people experience when they're working up here during the winter and not being around a lot of people. And then he goes on to tell him about Grady and how Grady went through the psychological process and then ended up killing his two daughters and his wife, which is a really interesting aspect. But we did have some twin stuff that we were going to put in there, but we thought that people would come after it too much because Ullman says that the two girls were 8 and 10 years old, so that doesn't make them twins. And but Kubrick dresses them up around the exact same age, wearing the exact same thing. So we're getting the visual representation that they are twins within the movie, but then it's Allman saying that they're 8 and 10 years old. So we didn't want to have any discrepancies there. But you're 100% right in saying that a lot of the experiments in Germany were done on twins with Joseph Mengele, and they were trying to figure out, psychic abilities between twins and that stuff. And we had some things that we wanted to put in there, but just for the sake of, people calling us out for, putting things together that don't fit, we took it out. But it is a very interesting aspect, especially when you look at, which I wasn't the first person to see this. This has been talked about before. Was the at the very end of the movie when the when you see Jack dead and then he's frozen outside, when he's chasing Danny through the maze, and Danny retraces his steps, which is exactly what an MK Ultra victim would do, would retrace their steps back through the program to figure out what had happened to them, what went down, who did this to them, where they are. They have to retrace their steps in their mind. So Kubrick is showing that symbolically with Danny having to retrace his steps in the snow in order to hide from uh, Jack in order to escape. And then at the end of the movie, when the shot pans into the Overlook Hotel, and then you see the picture on the wall that says July 4th, 1921, and it shows a picture of Jack. And Jack is, then it fades to a larger picture of Jack. For a split second, you can see a tiny little Hitler mustache beginning to form on Jack's face. So that correlates with the Nazi swastika that I also seen in the background that I'm the first person to ever see, and it really makes the entire thing make sense because we have Kathy O'Brien in there as well. We talk about Project Paperclip and how the MK Ultra programs were brought over from Nazi Germany, and those experiments were just continued from Germany after World War II, with all the aerospace people and the NASA rocket scientist and all the other scientists that were brought over on Project Paperclip. So it kind of brings the whole thing full circle, and we know that Kubrick had to have been aware of the MK Ultra programs just sheerly based on the fact that he made A Clockwork Orange, because that entire movie is about mind control. Feeding drugs to Alex, the main character, and making him watch these movies, which then control his behavior. And that's another thing that we get into in our documentary, A Clockwork Shining, is we talk about the psychic driving aspect and how that plays a major role, because psychic driving is a real MK Ultra technique that was developed by Human Cameron in Canada, and it's basically to implant a thought and an idea in somebody's head in order to influence their thought patterns and ultimately influence their behavior. So whenever Jack is supposedly writing this book all day long, and Wendy comes in and sees that he is not actually writing a book, he's not actually writing a novel, he's just writing the same sentence over and over again, and she discovers it, and he becomes triggered. And there's several instances of that in real life, and that's another really interesting thing about Kubrick. It seems like a lot of his movies really echo real life in a lot of ways, like with the Clockwork Orange. There were crime rose like heavily after the movie came out. There was murders. They were called the Clockwork Murders, like, and it ended up getting banned in several countries. And Kubrick actually banned it in the UK himself. And then with Sue Lyon, that we talk about in the documentary, which was the star of the movie Lolita, which is about pedophilia and a young girl being basically taken advantage of at a really young age. That played out in real life. That was the exact same. What the movie is about was what happened to her in real life with Kubrick's producer for Lolita, which was 35 and she was 13 at the time, which that completely wrecked and destroyed her career. And the same with Shelley Duvall within The Shining. It's almost verbatim the exact same thing with Sue Lyon and Lolita, which is a Stanley Kubrick movie, and then with The Shining with Shelley Duvall, which is another Stanley Kubrick movie. That almost the exact same thing happened. Besides, Shelley Duvall wasn't a she wasn't underage, and she didn't. I don't think she suffered any sexual abuse during the filming of The Shining, but in the way that the abuse from Stanley Kubrick basically ruined her entire career. It brought her down to a level, and then it's like, oh well, what is Kubrick doing there? Because some of the things that he was saying and doing to Shelley Duvall is some of the way that you would want to break somebody down in an MK Ultra experiment. He was telling the staff not to pay attention to her, don't cater to her needs, don't empathize with Shelley. He was giving her a really really hard time, and his excuse for that was, well, he wanted to get a really good performance out of her. Well, it wrecked and ruined her career. If you look at Shelley Duvall's career, she wasn't really in anything after that movie, and she ended up on Dr. Phil, and she like looked like, you know not good. Her life was not going good in a trajectory, and she actually passed away this year. But it's just interesting how the movie is an experiment. Stanley Kubrick was running an experiment within the movie while he's rewriting the movie as the movie's being filmed. He's also running an experiment on the actors, and then it's an experiment on the audience too that is watching it. It's like it's a triple, quadruple whammy of a movie, and I don't think that there's ever been anything that comes close to it.
Yeah, that's extremely disturbing to think about. And listeners will probably be aware that there's many other films by Kubrick, like you mentioned, that are implicated in other things. So besides his actual Hollywood films, people believe, as I do as well, that the moon landing videos were actually created by Kubrick, and he was the guy who faked the moon landing and helped them to fake it. But then also you've got um, Space Odyssey, and the monolith, and there's lots of link ups to 9/11 in that. And if you look at the Ground Zero site, there's a big black Hilton hotel that looks a lot like the monolith now that looks over that site. So there's a lot of people who've done work on that. Then there's also Eyes Wide Shut, which some people today speculate got Stanley Kubrick killed. I don't think it did personally. I think all of his movies are revelation of method, revelation of the occult and what's going on behind the scenes. So I don't think it got him killed, but it certainly gave us insights into maybe what could be happening behind the scenes. Then, of course, the Clockwork Orange, like you said, Lolita, which literally child grooming was happening on the set of the actress, as you said, which is wild. And then you've got this film that we're talking about, which is The Shining, and it's your assertion and your theory that actually this film is revealing to us how they not only mind control people in terms of like a Manchurian candidate to kill somebody or to make them go crazy, but also how they enact that on the masses. And you talk about the book by Dave McGowan about Laurel Canyon, which we've discussed a lot on this show. I've had Matt Sergio on 3 times where we spoke about the counterculture, the Fabian Society, and how all that stuff was engineered with the Beatles. And there's a lot there, Ryder. So let's maybe try and kind of dissect it a bit. Let's begin maybe with the early in the film. You mentioned about the book Catcher in the Rye, which is a book some listeners may be aware of, but can you just talk about the significance of that and why it's so important that that's in the film as well?
That's a fantastic question, and thank you for bringing it up. Because not a lot of people realize that that's what Wendy is reading the first time that we meet Wendy and Danny in the movie. She's reading a book by an intelligence officer, J.D. Salinger, called Catcher in the Rye. And many scholars and researchers have linked this book to being a mind control MK Ultra Manchurian style candidate trigger for assassinations. And there's real life um, examples of that with two really famous assassinations that happened within a year of the release of The Shining, which was uh, the Mark David Chapman murder and the John Hinckley attempted assassination of Ronald Reagan. So John Lennon and Ronald Reagan. And they were found on the scene of both of those assassinations. And which is so interesting because I never really understood, which we really get into in the movie with Joe Atwell. He has a really good, I think, interpretation of what Catcher in the Rye really means. He thinks he's decoded it and believes that it's more along the lines of the Freemasonic trajectory that a member would go through on their way up through the ranks and within Freemasonry, and that the book being there at the John Lennon murder assassination and the Ronald Reagan attempted assassination was like a warning to Freemasons to, like, keep their mouth shut, which kind of goes in line with Eyes Wide Shut, I believe, because that whole entire movie is, nothing but Freemasonic symbolism within there. I mean, in the first, 10 minutes of the movie, you have Nicole Kidman's character dancing with this gentleman, and there's seven-pointed stars all around them. A seven-pointed star is, the symbol for Venus, and Venus is the morning star, which is Lucifer. So you have all of these strange occult meanings that are hidden within Eyes Wide Shut that we mention in our movie, A Clockwork Shining. But I never really understood why Catcher in the Rye was such, like, it was a recommended reading. I don't think that it was necessarily where you were, but like in the United States, it was like it was a must-have reading. Like all the public schools in America, like basically forced all the students to read this book. And I never really understood that because Catcher in the Rye is such abysmal, bad, nonsensical, doesn't really do anything for the reader. It's like this, it's just like a strange, weird book that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But whenever you decode it, you get these hidden meanings. And Joe Atwell has done an amazing job with decoding it. And I don't want to give too much away within this conversation because I want people to, watch the movie and get his interpretation of what Catcher in the Rye really means. But the Catcher in the Rye fits in with our hypothesis of The Shining because it's been labeled as a Manchurian style Manchurian candidate, uh, MK Ultra assassin trigger. And what is Jack doing throughout the movie? He's trying to kill his family. He's trying to kill Wendy and Danny. So in I don't think that very many people have put two and two together that what Catcher in the Rye actually represents and why Wendy is reading Catcher in the Rye in the beginning of the movie, and Jack within the movie is a writer, so it's stands to reason that it was probably his copy of Catcher in the Rye that Wendy is reading in Boulder while Jack is at the Overlook doing the interview with Ullman.
Yeah, no, I thought that was an extremely important thing that you picked up on. And, actually, I think you could just do a whole film just on that, just on the Catcher in the Rye and the link ups to it, because it is symbolic of a Manchurian candidate, isn't it? It's been found at different scenes of assassinations and it's linked to the assassin. But what was really mind-blowing for me was that two of those attempts, one of them was John Lennon, which was successful as far as we're told. The other one was Ronald Reagan, which we was told wasn't success. Well, it wasn't successful because he continued to live. But we was told the book was being carried by Hinckley at the time he tried to do it. But they didn't happen till after the film. So if this was revelation of method
Yep.
and Stanley Kubrick was trying to tell us, listen, if you understand, if you can decode my film, I'm telling you about MK Ultra, the Monarch Project, and how we do mind control. I'm doing it on you whilst you watch it, and also I'm going to tell you that we're doing it to other people. And he puts that book in the film. He's literally telling you, and then a year later, there's two assassination attempts linked to people that were carrying this book, and that just is pretty unsettling actually to think about that he was warning people. Well, I don't know. How do you interpret it? He wasn't warning people. Would you almost say that it's kind of mocking people? That is that they're showing us these things.
Yeah, I actually have a book right here on the 100 most famous criminals that I thrifted. And I read through it, and there's a section on Mark David Chapman. And it says at the end of the chapter that what he did, in which we also show in our movie with The Sixth Sense with Will Smith, where Will Smith is talking about Catcher in the Rye. He's giving an explanation of Catcher in the Rye, and he goes through the Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley assassination. And at the end of this chapter on Mark David Chapman, he says that he stood up in court and said that if the jury wants his defense on why he assassinated John Lennon, all they have to do is read Catcher in the Rye. And then at the end of the chapter, it says that a psychologist went to visit Chapman in prison a couple of years after he had shot John Lennon, that he was still reading Catcher in the Rye. It's
Wow.
it's wild, dude. Like I mean,
Do
there's
you know
no
what
other.
happened with J.D. Salinger's wife as well?
No, I do not. Do you have any information on it?
Yeah, so J.D. Salinger, when in fact, there's a lot in common. between him and Kubrick in that they were both considered reclusive later on in life. But J.D. Salinger, he moved to a place called Cornish and he was known for courting high school students there. So they were like coming to his house and he was supposedly mentoring them. But knowing what we know about the mind control projects, and I think J.D. Salinger was probably in on this too, because he was said to have been a disciple of a New Age prophet who was a disciple himself of Yogananda, which we know was linked to the New Age and that psyop. Then he was part of the this group called the Dianetics, which was
Right.
Scientology. It was like the
Scientology.
first Scientology. But here's the really crazy bit. So
Which
his
is also
wife,
linked to the process church as well. But yeah, go
you've
ahead.
done a load of work on this, but also his wife Claire Salinger. When J.D. Salinger and Claire had their daughter, Margaret, she believed that J.D. Salinger was obsessed with the daughter and no longer gave her attention. And later on in life, Margaret said that her mother, Claire Salinger, plotted to murder her. Her mother admitted this to her, that when you was a baby, I plotted to murder you and then kill myself. Now, knowing what we know about J.D. Salinger and all of the link ups to these projects, could it be that his wife, who was a young woman, like a teenager, pretty much when they met, that he was applying these techniques to her? And
Mm.
it links kind of through to what you're saying about Kubrick. So it feels like all of these people that were around this book, Catcher in the Rye, and then Kubrick around these films, that they were in on something much bigger than maybe history has ever figured out. I think you're the first people to really start breaking through on this. So it's yeah, that's just something that I figured out about JD Salinger. And when I heard about that and then thought about your documentary in light of it, I thought, wow, so maybe this was going on in his family too with his wife.
That is really interesting. Thank you for bringing that up. I'll definitely make a note of that because we may actually be making an extended version of this movie and adding a bunch of other things into it. Because I could have easily have made this movie 3 or 4 hours long, but it was hard enough on me making an almost 2 hour long movie that I didn't want to. I didn't want to make it any longer than
No,
what it had to be.
I think you guys nailed it in that film because, like I said, when you watch it, you go away and it's a bit of a Pandora's box. Like I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to know what I truly feel about it. Besides, I enjoyed it for a long time because it links through to so many other things that we've learnt about in the past. And yeah, it's kind of disturbing. I think that's the problem is you're so disturbed by the thought of it all that you think, well, what else is hidden? You know, what else is hidden in his other movies? And maybe we could talk a little bit about Kubrick. How because all of the things you're talking about with these projects like MK Ultra and Monarch, they were only declassified like decades after. So how was he so involved in these intelligence communities? What do you think his role was? Why did they choose him?
Well, we have a document that we show in the movie that is from the U.S. Information Agency that basically cites that they're looking at Stanley Kubrick for some unknown government project, along with four other famous film directors. And it's stated in the document that Kubrick is most promising for this role within the government. And we also know that the government was making a lot of films at Lookout Mountain Air Force Base on top of Laurel Canyon in California, right outside of LA. Lookout Mountain Air Force Base was a top secret, basically a movie studio ran by the Air Force. Uh, Thousands and thousands of films were made up there. We don't really know exactly what was happening up there because a lot of it is still classified to this very day, but several people had top security clearance for it. A lot of top actors had security clearance for it. Ronald Reagan had top security clearance to be there. Marilyn Monroe, James Stewart, Cary Grant uh, all had top secret security clearance up there at Lookout Mountain Air Force Base. And that's where, which I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar, that a lot of the atomic test footage was shot up there at Lookout Mountain Air Force Base on miniature sets. So these weren't being filmed by like they weren't dropping a real atomic bomb and like filming it. It was done on a tiny miniature set to emulate the effects of what a nuclear bomb drop would be.
Wow.
And
Do you think that they were faking the nuclear tests, or do you believe that nuclear bombs are real and this was just something else they were doing to try and not have to film the real ones?
I think that that's more like the scenario that they did it because they didn't. Because how's the camera going to survive a nuclear bomb exploding? It's not. Like everything around, you're telling me everything around it, like an entire house is like obliterated and like everything is destroyed in a very large radius around this bomb dropping and the camera survives. It doesn't make any sense. It makes no logical sense. So, um, I don't really know what to say about the atomic bomb thing, atomic bomb situation, because I'll be yelled at either way that I go with it. They'll be like, "Oh,
Yeah. Well,
what do you
that's
mean
one
you
of the
don't? But
problems.
you believe that atomic bombs are real? You're stupid. You're an agent. You're working for the government." And then I'd be like, "Oh, well, they aren't real." And then they'll be like, "What are you talking about? They're definitely real. Look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki and all this stuff." So I just don't want to comment on
No, no,
because
you
either
do
way you
right
go on it,
because
people are
we're
going to
in a
yell at
crazy
you.
time. You know,
Um,
I was wearing one of I was wearing a knitted jumper the other night on a live stream, and one of the first comments I got was Mike's jumper's got Freemasonic symbols on it. It was a zigzag pattern. It was from you call it a thrift store over in the US. We call it a charity store. And you know, like you said, in today's world where you've got people who are so lacking in discernment and also online where people feel they can just literally be the worst version of themselves, then yeah, it's hard, particularly in the roles that we've got and you've got, where you're actually trying to put something good out and people then will just take a swipe at it, making some stupid remarks. So no, I think you're right not to make a comment on that. But essentially, there's a studio on an Air Force base, and it's the Laurel Canyon studio. So this is where you had all of these different bands and uh, John Morrison, the Doors, and all of these hippies that would go on to form the counterculture. This is where it took place, right? It's the same region in Laurel Canyon.
yes, that is on the top of Laurel Canyon where all the bands came out of. The Monkees, Frank Zappa, The Doors, which is another really interesting part of our documentary that I think kind of catches a lot of people off guard because it's not only about, Stanley Kubrick and The Shining and A Clockwork Orange. It's also about the music industry. It's about the film industry. It's about these intelligence communities. It's about the military. It's a multi-layered documentary. And that's one of the things that I think, I mean, it even kind of shocked me. I even had a realization, and that's no joke. I had a realization as I was making the movie and putting all this stuff together. I'm like, holy shit, this is why people can never really make it. Like you can be the best at whatever it is that you do. You can be the best freaking podcaster in the world. You can be the best singer in the world. You can be the best movie maker in the world. But if you don't have the right connections, if you don't have the right people behind you, then you're never going to get anywhere. You could be the best guitar player in the world and it's not going to matter because you don't have the backing of a certain group of people. Your family isn't a part of this group. You come from a background that doesn't have the famous gene, as they say. It's not, and you're not going to make it. And that's the sad reality
And
of
in this instance, it's not actually even that you coming from like let's say an elite family. This is actually more a case of your family's tied in with elites or is part of the military industrial complex or intelligence or worked for presidents. So it's more like they're choosing people who are going to go on to shape culture who have connections to the people who are going to try and do psyops on our minds, and they want to have those people. selected because they're going to be willing to go along with it. So it's actually more about mind control, isn't it? Than it's not like, oh, I'm the son of a famous guitarist. Now I'm going to be a famous guitarist. It's like, no, I'm the
No,
son of a military general who works in intelligence, and I'm going to now take people to a more debauched culture and society full of drugs and hedonism.
that's right. That's exactly right. And that's what we find throughout the 60s is all of these musicians, all of the real famous people through the 60s all had military fathers. They had family that was high ranking military generals. Jim Morrison's dad was responsible for the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which was a false flag that got us into the Vietnam War that killed thousands and thousands of people. Bob Marley's dad was a British naval commander. Sharon Tate's dad was a military officer. So when you look at all these people and you see that, I mean, and it would be a coincidence if it was just one or two of them, but it's all of them. Every single one of them all have military family, like high ranking military. I'm not just talking some entry level military guy, and that really explains why Jim Morrison was the way that he was, and why he could do whatever he wanted to do because he knew that in the end it wouldn't matter because his dad is this high up military general that's going to get him out of any of this trouble. It was a concoction by the military, basically the same as what people have researched and studied and have put together on the Beatles. That the Beatles is a CIA um, uh, led group to put out this music, and it's the same way with Jim Morrison. It's the same thing with all of these people, and it's so interesting too. Is like when you look at the '60s and the counterculture, because we know that the CIA basically started the counterculture to ruin the anti-war movement, to stomp out the anti-war movement. And then once they created this monster, they're thinking, oh, well, how do we now get rid of this culture that we have created, which is pretty much the hippie movement? How do we get rid of these? Well, I know what we'll do. We'll try and influence this Charles Manson guy to do the things that we want him to do, and then his crew ends up murdering Sharon Tate and two others, and then it's over because now it's been associated with serial killers, murders, and crime. No one will want to be a part of it. And that's pretty much exactly what happened after the Manson Tate murders happened. The 60s was over. It was done, and they just pretty much, washed their hands of the whole thing. It was a way to get rid of something that they created. And that's so interesting that they were the ones that fed the LSD to all these people. They were the ones that distributed it, put it out to the public. And then people are having, that basically ruined the anti-war movement. And they're like, okay, well, what do we do now? How do we, take care of this other problem that we actually did create? And then they just started inserting serial killers into the mix, and then the Charles Manson, and just got rid of the entire hippie movement. It was over. It was done with. So it wasn't necessarily like a staged event. I know Mark Devlin feels differently about this. He believes that it was that the Manson Tate murders was like completely 100% staged, which is not out of the realm of possibility. But we know that people throw around the word staged like that that every detail is like planned out, and that because it's staged that means that everything was fake. But that's not the case. Like what I think that these people do is that they just take advantage of a situation. They take advantage of a group of people or an individual, and they try and influence them to do what they want them to do. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. That's why they work on multiple people all at the same time, because they know that one of them are going to go in the direction that they want them to go. That's how agents work. Agents don't come out and outright deny something or confirm something. They just kind of push you, they just kind of nudge you in the direction that they want you to go. They'll just kind of plant a little seed, and then they'll see if that seed sprouts into a uh, a flower or not. If a flower might be too pretty, but it's just an example of the way that it works.
Yeah, I think so too. I think they seem to have a very sophisticated toolbox. I think a lot of the things we're talking about were probably their first steps into this mass mind control. Like they figured out they could start to warp people on an individual level with all of the experiments they did on people in mental hospitals back in like the 50s and 60s. And then you got to these massive cultural movements, and it was like, right, now can we shape an entire culture and a scene of, or like a group of young people? And then if you look at where we are today, Ryder, it's like an entire civilization through Netflix and Hollywood and TV.
Yep.
And they're very successful at it. I mean, we've got basically in the society, we've got two groups. We've got the left and the right, and both of them are mass mind controlled by their specific party and group. And there's very few people now that are not influenced on some level. I'd say the majority of what people think has been handed to them through narratives, and therefore will be filled with lies and deceptions. And it's become so normalized. And a big part of that is Hollywood, because we grew up absorbed in TV and Hollywood, that when they create deceptions now in the real world, it's normalized because we've been watching these films. So we actually believe their fake narratives in the real world. Like this happened to this person, this psyop over here, this politician over there. We actually believe that stuff because it feels like the film, and the film feels like reality. We've blurred them. We don't know what's real anymore.
That is completely right. And a big cause of that is confusion, right? They want the public confused and they want the public questioning their entire reality and to soak in this nihilistic view of humanity that you will accept whatever it is because you don't think that any of it can change. Like that nothing is that is too big for you to do anything about it. So therefore you do nothing. And you think everything is false and fake and staged. So you've basically just washed your hands of it. You've like dissolved any interest in it, and then you attack. You're able to flip between both sides, like straddling a fence. You can just go back and forth all you want, and those types of people they can't stand for anything because they don't believe anything is real. And you're 100% right in saying that the movies and TV shows have had that effect on us because I knew from a very young age that everything that any TV show or any movie that I ever watched wasn't real. I knew that those people were all actors and they were putting on entertainment, but movies to a certain degree has desensitized um, the population in order to accept certain realities that you otherwise wouldn't accept under normal circumstances. That's the confusion part of this, and that's what has been the goal since the very, very beginning. You had Yuri Bezmenov, which I showed a clip of Yuri Bezmenov. Do you remember the Yuri Bezmenov clip in A Clockwork Shining?
Yeah, I do.
After Kathy O'Brien is talking about the infiltration into the school system. That's what Yuri Bezmenov was talking about in the early 80s. He's like, if we can just pump enough garbage, this isn't a quote, it's just giving you a summary of kind of what he was saying. If we can pump enough garbage into the heads of these people in this generation, then in 2 or 3 generations, they're going to be the ones that's creating the policy. They're going to be the ones that is creating these laws. They're going to be the ones that's in charge. If we put Marxist Leninism ideology into the soft heads of these people, and it's not counterbalanced by basic human values, by patriotism of that country, which it's not. It's just let to go. They just let it keep going. Then we effectively have control of the minds of everybody. And that's exactly like what Barack Obama was talking about when he was giving his speech to a college, I think in 2022, it's either 2022 or 2023, where he's like, listen, if we just pump enough conspiracy theorizing into the public, we can effectively make it to where people no longer know what to believe. And when they no longer know what to believe, then we have them exactly where we want them. Because then they can't stand for anything and they'll just go along with whatever it is that we tell them. And when people lose confidence in their institutions, and when they lose confidence in government and in democratic uh, institutions, then the plan it's over. It's done. We effectively have them exactly where we want them, and that is what's happened with the United States and in some parts of other countries in the world.
Yeah, that's what's happening. That's where we are now. It feels like we're at the end of a really long project, and The Shining was a part of that. It was revealing something. It was having that effect upon us. But today everything is out in the open, like you said, and I think that's maybe like the success party for them. It's like, yeah, we're just going to do it openly. It doesn't have to be subtle. There's nothing subliminal here. Here's Rihanna and Sam Smith dancing around in devil's costumes, simulating sex acts with a big demon behind them. It's like, yeah,
Mhm.
we don't have to hide it from you guys. But I think the worst part of it is that people are almost, it's almost like the everyday person it's embracing the kind of sinister stuff rather than rejecting it. And I think that's dangerous too, because everything that's occult is being normalized and absorbed by people. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I don't watch films. Like I don't watch Hollywood films. I won't watch don't watch any Netflix. The only thing I'll watch is a documentary, and I think that's probably why yours had such a powerful effect as well. Is like that's the first time in years I've seen something that came from Hollywood. It was watching some clips from The Shining in your documentary, so I'm guessing that's why it had that effect on me.
Yeah, I could as well. Yeah, I'm not really like that. I enjoy movies and I enjoy film because I can see them. I can see it for what it is. I know what it is, and it gives me the time and the ability to just kind of shut my mind off because I'm like a thinker and I'm my mind's constantly thinking about all kinds of stuff. So whenever I put on a movie or a TV show, I'm able to just relax, and I've done that since I was a kid, and that's not to say that you should do that or you shouldn't do that. It's just I know exactly what's going on, and I've accepted what's going on, and I can just kind of tune out any kind of programming effect that it may or may not have on my subconscious. I just enjoy it for what it is because I think that it's an art. Filmmaking is an art, and those people are making a hour and a half, 2 hours, and sometimes 3 hour work of art, and I appreciate that because I know how difficult it is to create something like that, and
I
how
think you'd
much
struggle
time
to
and
do what you did if
energy.
you didn't watch films, right? This is kind of your thing, right? You produce films, and it's a passion of yours. So we're in a bit of a different spot. It's kind of like me with farming. I wouldn't do very well as a farmer if I didn't engage in farm animals and planting. So you kind of got to do what you do. This is your deal. So I totally get that. And yeah, and I'm sure there's a ton of good films out there that I would absolutely love, but. Yeah, it's something that I made a decision to do a while back, and it for me it works not to. But it does make me hypersensitive to stuff. Like it makes me
Yeah.
hypersensitive to those things now. If I get clips of films or even music, like I don't listen to really much music besides classical anymore because even the music I listened to when I was younger, it's just like I feel like too amped up. It's too much. My senses are hypersensitive to all that stuff these days.
Absolutely. But there's something within The Shining that what a lot of people don't know, which we present in our film, is that there used to be a hotel that sat right where Lookout Mountain Air Force Base is now, which is owned by Jared Leto from 30 Seconds to Mars, which is really interesting. I would love to interview that gentleman. He seems like a very eccentric guy. But there used to be a hotel that sat there, and the name of the hotel was Lookout Mountain Hotel. And it looked very similar to the Overlook Hotel within The Shining. And what's really interesting was that we didn't put it in the film, so it's just kind of like a little bonus thing that your viewers are getting right now. Is that Lookout Mountain Hotel burnt to the ground in which it looked very similar to the exterior of the Overlook in The Shining. In Stephen King's sequel to The Shining, Doctor Sleep, which there was also a movie made about Doctor Sleep as well that came out a few years back with Ewan McGregor in it. Uh, the Overlook burns to the ground, which this one happened a long time ago in the early 1900s, was when the Lookout Mountain Hotel burned to the ground. But it's like another version of art imitating reality and reality imitating art. It's like this back and forth thing. And I didn't think about that until the film had already been out, and I've been doing interviews about it and promoting it. But yeah, I thought that that was really interesting. Lookout Mountain Hotel burnt to the ground in the early 1900s, looked almost identical to the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. And then in
Wow.
Stephen King's second book and in the movie Doctor Sleep, the Overlook burns to the ground.
What do you think that means? Like, what do you think was going on at the hotel that went to a ground? Do you think that was being used as well by intelligence potentially?
Well, that was in the early 1900s. I don't think that the CIA wasn't formed then. The CIA came after World War II, along with the Air Force, and that memorandum of the National Security Act of 1947. A lot of the military was then created, and a lot of the intelligence communities was created based off of that act. So there could have been some. It's very difficult to find out anything about it. There's very few pictures. The two pictures that we show in the movie of the Lookout Mountain Hotel are really the only ones available. So it's very difficult to figure out any information on the Lookout Mountain Hotel, but it is a possibility that some sort of something was going down up there. But also during those times in the early 1900s, like things like would burn down like all the time, and it could have been arson. It could have been someone coming in and deciding to burn it down. They didn't like what was going, but it's just so interesting that right where that hotel sat, the military built their Lookout Mountain Air Force Base.
That is strange, Ryder. I think there's probably more to it because when you showed the photo in the documentary, it does look the same. Like it's too similar for it not to have been intentional. Like I don't think it was a coincidence.
Yeah, I don't think so either. It's and Stanley Kubrick, he lived in Laurel Canyon in LA for quite some time. He lived with his uncle Martin Prevalier for a long time, so he probably was aware of the Lookout Mountain Air Force Base on top of Laurel Canyon. I don't know why he wouldn't be. I'm sure a lot of people were. They knew what was going on up there, especially if you lived in Laurel Canyon. at the time. So he probably did some research and like looked into it more because Stanley Kubrick was a really big researcher. He had a whole team of people that would go out and do a bunch of research for him. They went to the Stanley Hotel before, and Stanley Hotel thought that maybe he was going to film The Shining there. He didn't end up filming it there, and that might have been a big reason why Stephen King was kind of pissed off at him because Stephen King really didn't like The Shining at all. The only good thing that Stephen King would say about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining was Jack Nicholson's performance, and he did not like the movie, and that might have been a reason. And another reason was is apparently Stanley Kubrick would call Stephen King in the middle of the night and start asking him a bunch of random, wild questions, like do you believe in God and like all this stuff. And it's really interesting too because the people that were around him and knew him would say that he didn't believe in he was kind of like a pseudo atheist, probably a straight up atheist, and he didn't really believe in paranormal or like the supernatural and the things, which could have been a reason that he was completely rewriting the script for The Shining. He wanted to take out the paranormal and supernatural elements and add realistic people into them. And we've seen how shitty Stephen King's version of The Shining was in that mini series that he put together, which was shot at the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. But Stanley Kubrick was a realistic type of guy. He wanted everything to look very real. He wanted his sets to actually have real items, not props. Uh, and that could have been a big reason why Stephen King didn't like the movie. And we weren't the first people to see this, but in The Shining, Stanley Kubrick changed the Volkswagen Beetle that Jack drives from a red Beetle to a yellow Beetle. And then later on, when Halloran is trying to make his way back up to the Overlook Hotel, when he flies in from Florida, because he received the visions from Danny that something wasn't right that was going on at the Overlook. He's driving up to the Overlook and he sees a red Volkswagen Beetle crushed underneath a semi truck. So that was kind of, Stanley Kubrick's way of saying, like, listen, like, you may be a good horror novelist, Stephen King, but you're not a movie maker, and your story does not transfer good to make a movie with. And I'm going to change it. And he did, and I think that he incorporated a lot of things in there. He put a lot of symbolic things that we've already talked about in there. He's trying to tell people that this is a real experiment that's being ran up here at the Overlook by the CIA. And it's just a coincidence that Ullman, the director of the hotel, looks a lot like JFK, and Bill Watson, which is his assistant, looks strikingly similar to Sidney Gottlieb, which was the head of the MK Ultra programs.
One thing that I found really strange, having watched the documentary and I was just having a quick look at what happened to the different actors and actresses afterwards, was that the children in the film, so you've got, of course, Danny Torrance, and then you've got the Grady twins. All three of them, I would say, are probably three of the most iconic child actors of the last 100 years because they're in this mega film. And I think I'm right in saying that it was one of the highest grossing films of all time at that time. I think it was like in the top five highest grossing for the first week or something like this. So it was a mega film. But what really shocked me, and I really wanted to get your take on it, is that all three of those people, so the two twins and Danny Torrance, never acted in any of the film. Now, I found that out about the twin girls, and I thought, well, that's weird because they were so iconic. Surely they must have at least been in some of the movies, or they must have got some offers and earned some money from this, and it was never in another film. And I was like, well, that's bizarre. But maybe, I don't know, maybe the parents just didn't like the response. I don't know. It could be a million reasons. But then when I found out that Danny Torrance hadn't been in any of the film either, and he just went dark, and I'm like, that kid was so iconic. He must have been getting offers left, right, and center, right? This just makes no sense to me, Ryder. And I don't know if you knew about that or if you thought about it, but that is really weird that ni none of them ever went on to act again. And it feels like that must be for a reason. What do you think
Yeah,
about it?
and the same with Shelley Duvall. She did act in there's a few other movies after The Shining, but none of them were a success, like The Shining was. And with Danny, the actor that played Danny, I'm pretty sure he got into a lot of trouble with, I think he became an alcoholic and got a bunch of DUIs and served some time in jail. But don't quote me on that because it's just from memory, from researching it and looking into it. It's sort of like Kubrick either makes or breaks people. He either turns them into like a superstar sort of to where that they can keep on going and acting, or he completely squashes and crushes their entire career. Jack Nicholson went on to still make movies after that, but his last movie was in 2010, and then he retired from acting after that. I think that it was due to memory loss or something with his brain. He's been out of the spotlight for a really long time now, 14 years. No one's heard from Jack Nicholson and what he's doing. And we also bring that up in our movie that Jack Nicholson doesn't know who his father is. His Jack Nicholson's mother doesn't even know who his father is. And he was also instrumental in the Laurel Canyon scene. He was in several movies that came out of Laurel Canyon that promoted LSD and promoted this hippie movement. And he was friends with Roman Polanski, and Roman Polanski raped a 13-year-old girl at Jack Nicholson's house. And then he fled the country so he wouldn't be prosecuted for that. And then at the same time, Jack Nicholson also left the country to go shoot The Shining for a year. So after that event happened, they just fled.
Did
They
anyone
left.
discuss why the 13-year-old was there? Like Jack Nicholson's house, 13-year-old doesn't sound good, does it?
Well, it's kind of theorized that maybe some things were kind of going. I don't really want to get too much into it because there's not
Yeah,
proof
but
or
Roman
evidence that things were going
Polanski, it
on.
was his wife who was killed by the Manson
Right.
family, right? So
Yes.
there's so many weird link ups here, like between all of these different stories. And they all kind of link up at some point to this mind control and this MK Ultra. Because we know that Charles Manson, he was involved in quite a few experiments involving LSD. I think it was a US university where they took him and they were doing, maybe you can add to it. He was involved in some of those early MK Ultra projects, right?
Yes, there's evidence that pretty much Charles Manson was basically given the LSD that he would use to kind of mind control and use on the people of his cult and the people that he calls his family. He was basically given that LSD directly by the CIA. Because every time that Manson would be incarcerated before, he would always be let out. Every time they would always just almost immediately let him out. So it's like it kind of stands to reason that he was kind of like this experiment, like what I was mentioning earlier. Like they'll get their hooks in on like one person, they'll try and push them in this direction to do something, and they kind of let them go out there and do whatever they want for however long they want until it serves their agenda of the process that they how they wanted it to play out.
And what do you think about Kubrick in general, Ryder, having made this film? And also, we should probably touch on his Freemasonic connections as well. Do you think he was a high-ranking Freemason, given you point out in the film there's all this symbolism to do with Freemason? There's lots of references to pillars or the number 11. You've got the twins. Do you feel like there's a definite link up between him and Freemasonry? Is that proven, or is it just speculation?
Well, the fact that Catcher in the Rye is there, Joe Atwell thinks that Catcher in the Rye is about the Freemasonic trajectory of a member through the ranks of Freemasonry. You have so many of the third eye symbolism throughout a lot of Kubrick's movies. You basically have Eyes Wide Shut that is some form of like it's filled with Masonic symbolism in Eyes Wide Shut. And it seems that if he wasn't a Freemason, then he definitely had knowledge of the inner workings of the Freemason belief structure and the initiations and some of the rituals of Freemasonry. If he wasn't a member himself, he definitely had knowledge of what they do and how they, participate in their rites and their rituals. Where if we do end up doing the extended version or the director's cut of this movie, we're going to get a little bit more deeper into Freemasonry because one of my really close friends, I just found out the other day after he had watched our movie that he was a master Freemason of his lodge, and he was telling me like how because we talk about psychic driving a lot in the movie and how Jack is being psychically driven to murder his family, and how Sirhan was psychically driven to murder RFK. How it's the same thing. Jack is just doing his own version of psychic driving within The Shining.
I think what I was thinking about also is the faked moon landings that if Stanley Kubrick did shoot that, we know that the Apollo astronauts left a Freemasonic flag, I think, on the moon, apparently. That's what they were all Freemasons, right? Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, they were all high-ranking Freemasons, and they took Freemasonic items to the moon, apparently. 14 times the speed of a bullet, they flew up there, left it up. There was a camera filming them as they left. No one knows what happened to the cameraman. Well, we do it with Stanley Kubrick. And yeah, so if he was a Freemason, then he would have been privy to all of that. And we know that in Freemasonry, there is a blood oath to secrecy. You have to keep it. And it's mentioned in your film. If you betray that, you're out of there in a literal sense.
Yeah, the moon landing thing is a really interesting aspect, and I've been telling people that I think it's definitely plausible because 2001: A Space Odyssey was being filmed at the exact same time as the moon landings was going on, so it's perfectly feasible that something like that went down to where Kubrick was like, "Hey, let's film the scene." The actors didn't know that it was a part of that it was going to eventually turn into the moon landing footage. It wasn't put in the 2001: A Space Odyssey, and that's how everyone's seen it because that's the thing within the moon landing stuff is like people are like, well, I don't know how they would have done that. How would they have faked something that so how did they keep everyone's mouth shut and their lips shut on this thing? Well, that would be the easiest way to do it because literally nobody would know. They just feed that footage that they think is live footage. They just like restream it. You know how like some people there's a program out there that you can put pre-recorded shows into a program and then restream them to all these platforms as if they're live. I know some people that do that. I've never done that before. because I actually like being live and I like it being done when it's done. But that would be the exact same thing that they would have done back in 1969 is they would have just taken the pre-recorded footage, put it through the software and broadcasted it as if it was live to the entire world.
Yeah, I don't know many people today that believe the moon landing, so I think that one has become a mainstream. I think it's something like 60% of Americans no longer believe. I'm not saying those statistics are correct, but I'm pretty sure that was the last figure I heard. But another way to do it, of course, is if you do have Freemasonic brothers involved in all of this and they're sworn to secrecy and they understand that that is a life and death oath, then they're going to keep the secret. And if all of the astronauts were Freemasons as we know they were, then yeah, that's one way to keep a secret. Also, Stanley Kubrick, if he was a high-ranking Freemason, he was sworn to secrecy too. So it makes sense to me. And you mentioned in the documentary this woman who was a part of this incest cult and that she was put through trauma-based mind control. I think it was Kathy O'Brien, is it?
Yes.
Yeah, Kathy O'Brien, and that she says in that she was trafficked to Freemasons as part of her abuse when she was a child. So that was another interesting part of the film. Do you want to just mention a bit about Kathy O'Brien and how she links to the film itself about The Shining? Sorry.
Yes, Kathy O'Brien is a Monarch MK Ultra survivor, and in the background, whenever Danny sees the twins for the first time at the Overlook Hotel, there's a poster in the background, and the bottom of the poster says Monarch. And we have put together that, it's Monarch MK Ultra mind control. Unlike many people that have seen this poster before, they relate it to something different, but no one has ever mentioned Monarch mind control before. They've seen the poster, but they just don't put two and two together that it's pertaining to Monarch MK Ultra mind control. And Kathy O'Brien was put through the program. She had a congressional testimony that was banned under national security in 1995. She has a book out called Formation of America, and she also has a documentary where she talks about her experiences within the MK Ultra mind control programs at a White House Pentagon level, and she lays out her history and how she got put into these programs through, her father basically sexually abusing her, and then to avoid prosecution, he sold her into these governmental programs. She was also trafficked through her grandfather's Masonic lodge, like you were mentioning. She was taken to various NASA and DARPA installations for sophisticated mind control programming. And she is a very integral part of the documentary. Without her, I don't think that it would hit us hard because that's what we relate in the movie is that monarch poster in the background and her being a victim, probably in my opinion the most credible victim of MK Ultra mind control that is still living and is a public figure. So I all the love and gratitude for her being strong enough to come in and be in our movie and continuously speak out against the injustices and the things that have gone on for many years regarding MK Ultra and mind control.
Yeah, it's kind of shocking to hear somebody with a testimony like that. And she's not the only person that I've heard with testimonies like that. But like you said, the fact that she was on congressional hearing, that's wild, isn't it? That is actually absolutely shocking, and that's been sealed. So well, that wouldn't happen with somebody who wasn't credible.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. I 100% believe her testimony and what she went through, and I'm very happy that she was a part of our movie, and that she continues to speak out on these topics. She's been on my show, me talking to her and interviewing her several times on my show as well. So I'm very thankful that she was a part of our documentary, Clockwork Shining.
Let's tie it all together then, Ryder, because I think we kind of skipped across all of the different elements of this because there's a lot. And I think for people who listen back to this, they'll see how it links together to so many other things that they're probably already aware of. They might have heard some episodes in the past on specific parts of what we've discussed, but within this one film, The Shining, all of these elements are a part of it. Secret societies, symbolism, mind control, engineering at us as the viewer, and assassinations. It's kind of wild and pretty disturbing. So, your final thoughts on this? What do you feel now you've made this documentary? How does it reflect on where we are as a civilization? Do you feel kind of, I don't know what word I'm looking for, concerned having made this documentary? Like, does it make you feel uneasy that this is where we are as a culture, that this is something that we created and it reflects, I guess, on our society and where it's gone to?
Yeah, as I was mentioning, it was even a big shock for me, as I'm even constantly mind blown by just watching it, and really putting together all of the pieces, because it's an intelligent film that you also have to put two and two together for yourself, and relate things to other things that are talked about within the movie. There's so much in there. It's almost a 2 hour movie. It's about as long as we've been doing this show. So I really hope people go and check it out, and support independent filmmakers, because we did this all ourselves. I filmed it, I put it together, I edited it, I put all of my time, work, and energy and effort into making this movie. And it's definitely the best thing that I have ever put together. And I hope people go out and support it, because Hollywood is dead. This this independent wave of filmmaking, this is the time to do it. And I hope people will go out there and watch it and buy it and rent it however you want to. I mean, you can rent it for a cheaper amount of money. For $2.99, you can rent it on Amazon Prime. You just type in A Clockwork Shining. But I just highly recommend buying it. It's not too much more expensive to buy it than it is to rent it, and that's really going to help me out as a filmmaker and help me continue making more projects in the future. And hopefully we'll get a link in the description. I'll get the link is in the description on my end for this video. So anyone who's watching it on my end, click the link in the description to watch the movie A Clockwork Shining on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV Plus. If you're in a country that you can't get it on Amazon, if you download Apple TV Plus, you'll be able to watch it on there if Apple TV is available in your country. Thanks so much, Mike, for having me on. Really appreciate it, brother. It was a wonderful conversation, and thank you for watching my movie, my friend. I really appreciate it. It was really in depth, and you asked really great questions. So really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming back on, Ryder, especially right after the movie has just been released. I think hopefully this will draw some more viewers across. I really enjoyed it. Unsettling, gave me definitely pause to reflect on everything that we discussed tonight. And yeah, I think listeners who want to understand how maybe we got to where we are, this is the perfect documentary to explore that with. So thank you so much, Ryder. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Hallucinogenic drugs, hypnosis, electric shocks to the brain.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
Some of the methods used in secret CIA mind control experiments.
There are many theories as to what The Shining is really about, from the faking of the moon landing to Native American genocide and the Holocaust.
Now, if he did fake the Apollo moon landing, then he probably has really deep connections into the intelligence world. Why are there these gigantic continuity errors in this movie?
The occulted meaning has to be comprehensible. It's just hidden, usually in a very systematic way, so that it could be understood by someone coming along later on who knows what the real meaning is supposed to be.
We believe that there's something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface of this masterful film.
So Lookout Mountain Hotel looked a lot like the Overlook Hotel.
You realise that there's no such thing as coincidences like that.
As Lookout Mountain Studios, ran by the Air Force.
That told the story of nuclear weapons testing by the United States.
Of the Army, Navy, and Air Force, the Air Force was known to be the most excited, the most turned on by MK Ultra and its prospects.
Reportedly, there were more films made at Lookout Mountain than at all the other film studios in Hollywood.
We really don't know what these famous film directors were being recruited for, what project or whatever. Was it the moon landing?
The CIA's MK-Ultra programs were admitted to the public in 1975, 5 years before the release of The Shining.
These experiments were done without the informed consent of the patients.
Look at some UFO cases, and the things that are reported tells me that MK Ultra is likely being applied.
In my MK Ultra mind control experience, I was taken to various military, NASA, and DARPA installations for sophisticated mind control programming.
Walt Disney, Marilyn Monroe, James Stewart, Cary Grant, Ronald Reagan. Nobody really knows what they were doing up there.
As well as high-ranking military and Department of Defense personnel.
What people don't realize is that many of the people that worked with Kubrick also worked with Kennedy. This is actually the smoking gun proving that Kubrick was working with the government.
These were all CIA-sponsored experiments.
I said, I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
And putting little symbolic, cryptic clues and Easter eggs pertaining to the fact that they're still doing it.
These clues include a hidden swastika in the background of the gold room.
What was the setup, what it was being told, and realize that it was a lie all along.
But right there in the narrative, in the dialogue, they're telling you that this was a very real program coming out of those nice folks at the CIA.
Here's Johnny!